Mr. Levey, I'll start with you, if I may. How would your ideal justice currently serving on the court vote in this case? The constitutionality of state law requiring the registration of all handguns and, except for law enforcement personnel, permitting the possession of such handguns only in the registrant's principal residence.
Well, certainly I think that from any sort of textualist or originalist point of view, the Second Amendment is an individual right, and the Supreme Court did find that last year in Heller. But then the question becomes, and I think certainly one of the questions that has not been decided is it incorporated to the states. I think it should be and will be. But the standard of review is not clear. And that is one of the areas where Professor Roosevelt has pointed out there is room for development of doctrine. And we don't know exactly what that doctrine will be. But one thing we know is that if the court is not activist, it will look to the other parts of the Bill of Rights to determine a standard of review. And generally, fundamental rights in the Bill of Rights, get strict scrutiny. So the question then becomes, under strict scrutiny, would registration be allowable? Again, off the top of my head, probably. Probably it would be. Even a strict constructionist like myself realizes there's plenty of room for differing opinions as long as they're plausible interpretations of the meaning and intent of the Constitution. So that's why I can't give you a more definite answer on registration. As to possession in your home, I think that probably goes too far. Generally, strict scrutiny means that something will, a restriction on that right will be struck down unless there's a compelling reason for it. There might well be a compelling governmental reason to restrict the use of handguns in certain contexts, but a blanket prohibition that says you can never have them outside of your home, I think that would go too far. And if we apply the same standard that applies to the rest of the Bill of Rights, the parts of the Bill of Rights, frankly, that liberals like, then I think it would be very, very hard to uphold a ban on firearms outside of your home, an unconditional ban on firearms outside of your home.
Thank you. So your ideal justice would vote the particular state law constitutional or unconstitutional?
Would vote the registration aspect of it constitutional, the restricting it only to principal place of residence would strike that down as unconstitutional.
Thank you. Professor Roosevelt, same question to you. How would your ideal justice pass on that particular state law?
Well, my ideal justice would start with the text of the Constitution. The Second Amendment is an unusual clause of the Constitution in that it gives us a right and it also explains why that right exists. So if we're talking about the original Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights, that, of course, restricts only the federal government, and it tells you that the purpose of the right to keep and bear arms is to preserve the functioning of state militias. Now, when we talk about a right that can be asserted against the states, we would actually be talking about a 14th Amendment right. We would be talking about the Second Amendment as incorporated in the 14th Amendment, probably the Privileges and Immunities Clause. And so we would ask, what was the purpose of that incorporated right? And I believe this is something that shifts. I would say this is an individual right. It's no longer about militias. What is the Reconstruction Congress thinking of with the 14th Amendment? They're thinking of allowing freed slaves to protect themselves against night riders and the Klan. So I think we actually do have a right here. It's an individual right, and it's geared towards self-defense. Now, no right is absolute. Most rights permit reasonable regulation. I think requiring registration of handguns is certainly reasonable. My ideal justice would uphold that. When you get to the question of prohibiting possession of handguns outside the primary residence, I think this is a harder question. My ideal justice would tend to rule narrowly. My ideal justice would be very sensitive to the facts. My ideal justice would be looking here for what the state could show in support of the idea that banning possession of handguns outside the principal place of residence is actually sufficiently important to meet some form of heightened scrutiny. I wouldn't say necessarily strict scrutiny, but my ideal justice would be looking for data about crime rates, about the use of handguns for self-defense outside the home, about what specifically the state's interests are. And my ideal justice might well think the answer is going to be different for different locations in the country. Maybe it's different in the cities, for some cities, maybe it's different if you're talking about rural areas. I can't say how this would come out as a blanket question. I think depending on the facts, it would probably be upheld in some places and struck down in others.
Thank you.